Thank you very much for the invitation. I think it is absolutely crucial that we talk about peace and justice in times of war, especially these days. We did touch upon 3 conflicts which are very, very different from each other, and I think this is also something we need to acknowledge. I mean, there are many other wars we cannot discuss today. I mean, I'm just mentioning some of the wars which are not so much on our front news pages, which is, for example, also Ethiopia, which is Congo, which is many, many conflicts, especially also on the African continent. Yemen, for example, in the Arab region, which is also very, very devastating. And I just think it is worth mentioning that the world is really not in the best shape, and there are many casualties there as well. What we need to understand when we want to talk about peace or just peace and how do we get out of conflicts is that these conflicts are all very, very complex. They have many, many different layers, and therefore we also need to understand that that there is no blueprint to get out of these conflicts. We have, for example, when it comes to Ukraine, I mean, it's a very specific conflict. It has been non-provoked by Ukraine. Ukraine did not attack Russia. It is a war of a nuclear power against another sovereign country. If we look, though, at Sudan, it is very, very different. I mean, you mentioned also the long history. It is very much also an internal conflict, but there are many proxies also involved. I mean, there is Egypt, there is, you can maybe talk more about it later. And then we were talking about Israel and Palestine, which also has a very, very long experience going back to the creation of the State of Israel, which obviously also lies in the tradition of what happened to Jews and the historical injustice experiences they have been facing for centuries. So, which ultimately then resulted in the Holocaust, and it makes it very, very understandable that they do have the feeling that there is a need for a safe haven for Jews, which was then the creation of a state of Israel. So all these complex issues, and there are many much more layers. I mean, in Ukraine there is still a geopolitical component, there is an identity component. You already touched upon when it comes to Israel and Palestine about the security issue, but there's also the refugee issue, there's the border issue, and it's also very much about religious sites. So all these complex issues makes it very, very difficult to find solutions and to get out of it. And I think it is important for us to understand it and to look very, very deeply and very, very closely at the specific dynamics. However, wars actually would be illegal, but we still know that wars are happening. But even if wars are happening, there are rules, even which are very important for us to follow while a war is ongoing. And I want to talk very, very briefly about what happened in 1948 when United Nations was created, because I think it is very important that after the Second World War we decided that this can never happen again, and we created a United Nations. We created the Geneva Conventions, which are actually very much centered on also protection of civilians when it comes on how do we actually deal with atrocities, what are the rules within wars, and I think it is important for us to understand this. So what happened now recently, and I will take 2 examples, when the full-scale invasion in 2022, and the war didn't start in 2022, which is very important, but the full-scale invasion happened then, and there was a resolution, a United Nations resolution, which was condemning the unprovoked attack of Russia against Ukraine, and I think we all embraced it very much, and all the European Union states voted in favor of it, and 35 states did not, they abstained. 7 also rejected, but 35 abstained. And many of these countries have been African countries and also some islands. And I think it is not to say that African countries didn't care about international law in general, but it is a feeling that they felt that we are always neglected. And now the West is very interested in this conflict because it is on European soil. And so they want us actually to follow their own interests. I think it is important for us to understand. And we just recently had another United Nations resolution, which was condemning, which was on the protection of civilians when it comes to the protection of civilians in Israel and Gaza. 120 states voted in favor. We had 44 abstentions, and I must say that many of them, 35 I think were, not 35, but many of them were actually European countries. And I think it is very important for us to understand this. So this is what really, if we zoom out a little bit, that we see that we are losing credibility if we just, if we don't say that humanitarian causes are for everyone. So what is true for Ukraine must also be applicable to Gaza. I think it is important for us to understand. We do see, when it comes to Ukraine, we were talking about this very big unity. The whole European Union was supporting Ukraine in the sense also that we had this common sanction regime. Now, if you look at the situation in Gaza, I was mentioning the abstentions, but we also had many countries, European Union countries, who did not only vote in abstention, but they actually rejected the resolution. There have been different arguments for that, like, for example, that Hamas was not specifically mentioned as a terrorist organization, which I also would have been favoring, but in the end it was not possible. Canada brought that in, that it wanted actually the resolution to include that Hamas is a terror organization. Unfortunately, as we see in a polarizing world, it was not possible. And this is also the reason why including Austria, which is a neutral country, actually objected the resolution. I think it is very interesting if you look at the Austrian tradition when it comes to foreign policy, because it was the only European Union neutral country which voted against it. So there were countries in the European Union voting against it, Austria, Croatia, Hungary, and the Czech Republic. And there were countries which were objecting, for example, Germany. And there were countries voting in favor, France, Portugal, and Spain. So if we look at the unity, I think it is for us very important to understand that international law must adapt to everyone at all times. And if we don't understand this, I think it will be very, very difficult for us to be credible in the future. Whenever we want to talk to other countries about human rights, they will not believe us. And I want to cite just one G7 official who in a recent interview in the Financial Times said the following: "We have definitely lost the battle in the Global South. All the work we have done with the Global South has been lost. Forget about rules, forget about world order. They won't ever listen to us again. What we said about Ukraine has to apply to Gaza. Otherwise, we lose all our credibility. The Brazilians, the South Africans, the Indonesians, why should they ever believe what we say about human rights?" And I think it is very important for us that even if we might have different opinions, that at least we look at it and we look at the allegations and we need to try to resolve them. I mean, it is a very difficult question how we can restore it. I think what we need to do is when we have any foreign policy that we need to understand that we want international law to prevail. We also need to look at what is happening within our specific countries. I mean, we are witnessing in many other European countries now the rise of anti-Semitism, also the rise of Islamophobia. We do see backsliding in democratic procedures. So it is very difficult for us to get our credibility back if we don't manage actually to do our homework here within our country. So I think this is also what is very important. I think we need to be very open and frank and also look at the world as it is. We do see this polarization, but we need to engage with the other countries and also see what is happening there and why we have not been able to bring like those African countries on our side when it came to the war against Ukraine. I think this is actually what we try to do, and with the actions now with the resolution for the protection of civilians, I mean, we do not regain credibility, so we just need to have a consistent policy, which is also not only based on interest, but also that it is a value-based approach, because the European Union actually is a value-based organization, and we see very often also within European Union countries that very often we follow more our national interests and actually the values or the international law we subscribed to because of what happened in history. But I would maybe like to add one more thing to Marina, because I think it is very important what she also said about reconciliation, which is a very difficult topic, especially right now, to talk about, and it is in all the other conflicts, it is a very difficult topic because normally neither perpetrators or victims are very keen to talk about reconciliation. So it is what we need to do, and Marina also mentioned it, is to establish facts, to look at war criminals, to talk about redistribution once we can agree on anything kind of similar to a ceasefire. These are already kind of first steps towards maybe a possible reconciliation in the future, but it is very, very obviously not enough. And what we also need to understand is that if we look at how actually wars end, we know that only a fifth of wars do actually end by military victory. The others end either through negotiations or they do not end at all. So however they start always with a ceasefire, but then a ceasefire is not a peace agreement. and peace is not only achieved by having an agreement, because we know that many peace agreements are also breached if they do not actually also tackle these accountability, if they do not really bring this feeling also that this peace is just. So I think it is very important for us to understand that peace is a very, very long process. There is no shortcut to peace. It's unfortunate, but I think that's how it is. And if we want to bring about peace, we need to include like all those issues all of you have been actually talking about already, when it comes to ceasefire, when it comes to redistribution, when it comes to restoration, when it comes to establishing facts, but also when it comes to truth-telling, because it is also important that if you look at the justice systems, that they very often look at the perpetrators, what they did, or the focus at least is on the perpetrators, but it is very important also to look at the victims, what is their story, what do they need to tell. It's important for them to heal and then maybe later then engage in something which might be similar to a process of reconciliation, which as peace is also not something with a beginning and an end, but it is an open end and very, very difficult to achieve with so many different layers. If we really have like an active foreign policy, and if we look actually what brings us security, because it does, like what is happening in Ukraine is very important, obviously for the Ukrainian civilians there, but it is also very important for our security. It is important also for the African countries when it comes to the whole situation, when it comes to the grains and I don't want to say energy security, but nutrition security and all those issues. So absolutely, I mean, we need to understand it. That is actually absolutely in our interest, and it goes along with our values. If you would put more, if we would invest more in an active foreign policy, which actually deals with these topics and has like the non-escalation at least as a goal. We also tried very much on working on these issues, and we just realized that the interest wasn't there, especially also in the case of Ukraine. I mean, until 22, when it was like so overwhelmingly. But I very much agree. Prevention would be the most important topic when it comes to this. The problem is institutions are only what the states, the member states, or whatever are in there. So we actually need to strengthen them ourselves. If we're not doing that, we cannot expect from the institution to do more than we, the member states, are willing to do. But I mean, to actually strengthen institutions is something we need to focus on. To talk again about the value of United Nations and not like, I don't know, like putting them down as if they would be irrelevant and I don't know, like making fun of people like Guterres who are actually calling for humanitarian ceasefires or whatever. I think that would be very important. And very briefly on the Austrian position, I mean, Austria, it's very understandable that we say we stand with Israel, in my point of view, because it is horrendous what happened. It is literally the slaughtering of innocent civilians in a very, very cruel way. I think it is understandable that we say we stand with Israel very much, and that they also do have the right to self-defense. However, even if they are using the right to self-defense, they need to do it within limitations of international law. And I think this is something we need to stress. Why the Austrian government explicitly now took this stance, it's difficult to say. I mean, the official version is that Hamas was not mentioned and as a terror organization, and that it is a one-sided resolution which favors Palestinians over, for example, the hostages of Israelis, which I do not agree, because if you read the resolution, it actually mentions Israeli civilians as well. But this is the stance of this government right now. But then you also look at the history of Austrian history. I mean, we did, like Bruno Kreisky was very active in the Middle East, like trying actually to talk about peace and how to actually we could bring a peace process there. Bruno Kreisky was the first, I think he was Chancellor or Foreign Minister at that time, I'm not sure, who actually talked even to Yasser Arafat. So I mean, if we would go back and like use our neutrality to make an effective and also value-based foreign policy, I think this could help, but it obviously also depends on political fractions at one point. I leave it here.